I will keep my little comment very short, but just welcome you all. I'm going to turn this over to our 2020 LBR president, the man who has been navigating the Lawrence Board of Realtors through a very interesting year. And like many of us, has had more Zoom hours than he cares to have. But I'll introduce Ryan Desch. And Ryan, if you'll take it away.
Thank you, Rob. And yeah,
Congrats,
I was actually,
Dad.
yeah,
Hey.
yeah, got a 3-day-old baby upstairs. So
Wow.
yeah, it's nice. So yeah, I was just before this, I was reading an NPR article on like some CEOs of Fortune 500 companies talking about how like enthusiastic they were at the beginning of the year that they could do their work remotely, and are now stating that there's obvious drawbacks to the human interaction this way. But alas, it's what we've got to work with this year. So I thank everyone for being here. Dr. Stanley Longhofer holds the Stephen L. Clark Chair of Real Estate and Finance in the Barton School of Business at Wichita State University, and is the founding director of the Center for Real Estate. In his role, Dr. Longhofer provides research services and educational programs to real estate professionals throughout the region, and is the author of the center's annual Kansas Housing Markets Forecast, which is what brings us here today. His insights regarding real estate market conditions are widely quoted in local, national, and national media outlets, including The Economist, Forbes, USA Today, and the Christian Science Monitor, and has been featured as an op-ed columnist in the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal's online edition. And I think he is no stranger to almost everyone here. I know he would probably have maybe more enjoyed a trip up to Lawrence today, as he likes to enjoy, but it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Stan Longhofer to be with us again today.
Thank you so much, Ryan. It is a great pleasure to be here today. And I really enjoy, I'm not supposed to play favorites. It's kind of like a parent with their children, right? But I have to say the Lawrence board is my favorite board to work with. And all of you ask such great questions. And again, I'm always amazed with the camaraderie that you have, and really appreciate it. So let me share my screen, and you should be able to see my PowerPoint presentation now. So Ryan or Rob, would you please jump in? If people have questions, please go ahead and ask those questions. I'm going to keep myself a little more focused on my presentation, so I may not see the chat, but please just jump in, and we can make this a very free-flowing discussion like we would if I was there in person.
I'll just monitor the chat for you. You got it.
Thank you very much. Very much. You know, as always, you know, we do such a beautiful job. I was really thrilled. My graphic designer enjoys working on this project. Of course, she probably just tells me this, but she says I'm her favorite client. And it's because she gets to be really creative with these projects. And so, so you have copies of the forecast there at your office. I'd encourage you to pick them up, use them however you find most useful. And once again, want to give a special thanks to Security First Title and to Ameritrust Credit Union. It's their contributions that make it possible for us to print these, make them available for you at no charge. So once again, very grateful to them. And then I'm also, you know, especially grateful for the relationship that we have with all the realtor boards across the state, including the Lawrence Board of Realtors. It's because of the access that we have to your MLS system that we have access to the data necessary to make it possible to do this forecast. So thanks to all of you once again. And so with that, let's jump in and talk about the housing forecast. And of course, we can't do that without talking about the underlying economic fundamentals. And I thought it might be useful to go back and look at what I said last year in the presentation. And so I made a statement at the time that the labor market and mortgage market fundamentals, the things that underlie what will happen in the housing market, were really, really solid a year ago. Mortgage financing cheap and widely available, labor markets really pretty healthy. But I finished talking about the economic environment, and I gave a little caveat that I said, you know, things have been going so well for so long that all of this could change rather quickly. And, as economists, we get things wrong so often, so wrong, that we have to take some sort of credit when by pure chance we say something that sounds prescient. And whoever could have imagined how quickly, how starkly, and how dramatically things changed. Because I know it matters in your market, I've included not just the Kansas and US unemployment rates here in Lawrence, but I also put on Topeka and Kansas City. And one of the things that I want you to note here with this is that typically Lawrence has the lowest unemployment rate. Lawrence and Manhattan have the lowest unemployment rates in the state, and it's because of the stability that the universities give as the economic driver. But in the wake of the shutdowns with the pandemic, unemployment rates in the Lawrence MSA jumped up just as sharply as did Kansas City and Topeka. And so not quite as severely as the US as a whole, but very sharp increases in unemployment. And even with the declines that we've seen in the wake of kind of easing, unemployment rates are still higher right now than they were at the peak during the midst of the Great Recession. And so I think it's really difficult to overstate what could be the long-term impact of the economic fallout of the pandemic. Really, really severe. Of course, we look at the labor market sometimes from two different vantage points or perspectives. One is the unemployment rate, which is focused on individuals and do they have jobs. An individual who lives in Johnson County but works in Douglas County would show up in the Kansas City metropolitan area unemployment rate, not in the Lawrence unemployment rate. And so sometimes it's a little bit better to focus on employment, and employment is based on the location of the jobs. So somebody who lives in Douglas County but works in Kansas City, they would show up in the Douglas County unemployment rate, but they would show up in the Kansas City employment figures. And so once again here, we look at this and we see really, this is the year over year percentage change in employment. So compared to where we were the same month the prior year. And once again, the levels of job losses here far exceed what we saw in the midst of the Great Recession. And even now, we're still year over year down, really levels that are just matching where we were in the Great Recession. And Rob, I think I saw some things pop up on the chat. Did you want to jump in with any questions about this?
I will be watching that just to help you, but Leah, who works with us here, is just kindly reminding all of you that we have copies of the forecast in a hard copy here at the office. So we'll mention that again after you're done, Stan. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much. Well, like I said, don't hesitate to jump in and interrupt me if there are questions.
Very good.
So, the job losses have been very, very stark, and some of the economic fallout of it was mitigated partially by the PPP loans. Some of it was mitigated by the extension and expansion of unemployment benefits. But nonetheless, what do we foresee in terms of employment in the coming year? This is the forecast that was released for the state of Kansas by the Center for Economic Development and Business Research at Wichita State University. They released it just last Thursday. And as you can see, it's a very sharp drop for this year in employment. On average, we're expecting total employment to finish the year 4.1% lower than we did in 2019. And if you look at the actual level of jobs on there, of 1,364,000, that's the lowest that we've seen since 2012. And so lost, tremendous amounts of employment. And then if you look at the forecast for next year is a 0.5% increase in jobs levels. But again, that still leaves us at a level that's just really on par with 2013 or just below. And so there's a long row to hoe if we're going to recover fully from what we have. And I need to clarify even further that, Jeremy had stated in his forecast that in no time in the past has it been more difficult to make economic forecasts because so much is dependent on what are inherently unforecastable factors. When will we have a vaccine? When will we be able to begin to return to more normal economic activity? And also, what will end up happening in terms of additional economic stimulus from the federal government to help offset some of these issues? Jeremy made this forecast making the assumption that there would be additional economic stimulus coming forward. And I think that's the most likely scenario. But that's not a foregone conclusion, and we shouldn't be too sanguine about that happening no matter what. And if there is not further economic stimulus, then the the job losses could be even further next year. And again, what we're seeing right now with some of the job losses, especially in the manufacturing sectors, is that some of those are ending up being much more structural and will take it's not like we can just, remove some of the restrictions and all of a sudden employment is going to jump back up. No, it's going to take a long time for employment to recover in these areas. I thought you might also like to see the Kansas City employment forecast that they have. And what you'll notice is that the forecast is a little bit sharper drop this year in terms of the employment impact in the Kansas City metropolitan area, and a little bit stronger recovery next year. But still, you're looking, even after a recovery of 1.4% next year, total job numbers are below where they were back in 2016. So again, still a long way to go to come back with a full recovery. So those are challenges and headwinds that we face. The flip side of it is the mortgage market. Of course, mortgage rates a year ago, we said, no way, can't go lower, gonna have to go back up, maybe stay flat for a while, but what have we done? We've dropped again. I don't know that I can say historic lows anymore. It just becomes kind of a trite, banal statement when we're talking about mortgage markets. And so the Mortgage Bankers Association's forecast is that 30-year fixed mortgage rate will stay below 3.4% through the end of next year. So incredibly low. I would mention that we are beginning to hear some reports of tightening in terms of underwriting standards. Some of that is coming because mortgage lenders, quite frankly, just cannot handle all the volume that they're dealing with. But some of it, I think, is in response to Fannie and Freddie and really trying to make sure that they're not going to end up getting saddled with some severe losses going forward if the unemployment situation continues as we go forward. So fundamentally right now, we're with some real headwinds when it comes to the job market, but we're in really good situation when it comes to mortgage rates. So any questions as there are relates to the economic background and what that will portend for the housing market? Hearing nothing that's jumping in right away.
I do have one. I'm sorry, I'm a little slow.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
We do have a question. How long do historic lows become renamed normal rates?
That's a really good question. How long before historic lows just become a new normal? We know from the situation of Japan that long-term, over a long period of time, 20, 30 years, they have been at what seemed unreasonably, unsustainably low levels of interest rates. And it just has continued ever since they went through their recession in the early 1990s. We never thought that was possible, never thought that was a reasonable outcome. So there are, there are precedents that we have for this to happen on an ongoing basis. That being said, with respect to mortgage rates, it would not be happening if it were not for the fact that the Federal Reserve was continuing to expand their purchases of mortgage-backed securities. This is a direct impact of stimulus activity by the Federal Reserve. And so as long as they keep purchasing mortgage-backed securities, that's going to put downward pressure on mortgage rates. One of the things that you will notice here is that the split between, say, the 5/1 adjustable rate and the 30-year fixed rate has essentially disappeared during this time. And again, that's a reflection of the extraordinary moves that the Federal Reserve is going through to try to help do its part to help mitigate the effects of this downturn. I still firmly believe that if you think about mortgage rates and what ought to be built into a mortgage rate, a lender needs to earn a real rate of return. Just any lender needs to be able to give, if you're going to if they're going to give you their money for a period of time, they need to earn something back for that. And let's just call that the real risk-free rate. I tend to think long-term that ought to be about equal to the growth rate in the economy. So let's just call that 2%. That's slow, real economic growth. In addition, the lender needs to receive some sort of premium for purchasing power lost, inflation. And so Fed's long-term inflation target is about 2% plus or minus. So let's add another 2% to that to just make sure that the dollars that we pay back to the lenders are can buy as much stuff as the dollars that they gave us. And then there is some risk inherent in mortgages. And so there ought to be another 1 to 2% premium above that for mortgages above that risk-free nominal interest rate. And so at that point, you're talking a 5 to 6% rate as what I would really consider to be a minimum 30-year fixed mortgage rate for a market in which you have some stable, not spectacular, but solid economic growth, inflation that's modest, but within the Federal Reserve's target, and with nothing funky going on that's distorting the markets. And so there's a reasonable premium for risk for those mortgages. I still believe that. When are we going to get there? You got me. It's been, I thought would happen quite a long time ago. Looked like maybe we were headed back there in 2018, but we haven't gotten there now. So again, Mortgage Bankers Association's thrown in the hat. They keep saying now, just stay where we are, stay where we are, stay where we are. And where we are right now is, ridiculously low rates. So what's been happening with home sales activity? Well, you all know this. These are the blue bars on here are the actual home sales reported by your MLS for the Lawrence MSA, which in your case is simply all of Douglas County. The orange line is the moving average. So it smooths through the seasonality and kind of gets at those underlying trends. And what you can see is that after tapering off a bit early in 2019, there really was kind of an upward trend that was moving forward. And then since the pandemic hit, we've really kind of plateaued. And you might say, oh, well, that's the impact of the pandemic, but that really doesn't appear to be the case. It really appears to be, you wouldn't know from the housing market that we're in the midst of a very, very severe recession. Sales continue to be strong. Demand is extremely strong. And the challenge that we have is the inventories, the lack of inventory of the homes available for sale. And so once again, we measure this by a number that we call months supply. We take the active listings and divide it by the number of homes that are sold on average over the past year. And so if there are 1,000 homes available for sale and 200 homes sell in a given month, then 1,000 divided by 200, you have a 5-month supply of homes available. And usually we think that a balanced market is about a 5-month supply. About a 4 to 6 month supply. And that's that shaded area that I've put here in this graph. And what you can see is that, Lawrence, you haven't been in that situation for nearly 5 years where you've had a balanced market. Although buyers haven't necessarily behaved like it's a seller's market, that pressure and that tendency has been growing now for a number of years. And we're at a situation now in Lawrence where you're looking at month supply at the end of last month that was about a 1.5 month supply or just under that. Incredibly tight inventories. I do want to note one other thing that's interesting in this graph is that you'll notice that the US saw a spike in months supply back when the shutdowns occurred. And that really did not happen in Kansas. And the reason is because Governor Kelly declared real estate an essential industry, and we were not forced into a complete shutdown, which did happen in some other states. And I think that was a very wise move. One of the things I've said throughout all of this efforts to try and contain the pandemic is that we have to be very, very smart and targeted in our efforts. We need to do the simple things that can help ensure that we don't have broad spreads that require more draconian impact. What happened in Kansas, in New York City could happen almost anywhere. And when you get a surge of cases that put you in a place where emergency rooms and hospitals are being overwhelmed, that creates real problems. And so anything we can do to keep from that extreme, that's simple and minimizes the impact on economic activity, overall, that's a good thing. And again, real estate is a low risk activity in terms of the level of high person-to-person contact that could really cause super spreading events. So again, I think this graph here shows how we did things right in Kansas, at least in that initial stage of things. So what is our forecast for home sales for Lawrence over the coming year? You continue to defy gravity. It's just really remarkable. And we're forecasting that home sales are going to be up this year, 1.1%, not spectacular, but somewhere, somehow you keep finding new homes to sell to buyers. And so I don't know, maybe you're making hobbit holes somewhere over in the hills on the side of campus or something, but you're finding homes to sell. And so sales will we expect to increase to 1,500 units this year. We think that will stay flat next year. Two things are coming into play with next year's home sales forecast. Number one, I am concerned about the economic, the continuing impact that unemployment will have. Right now, I do believe we're in a tale of two cities when it comes to the impact of the shutdowns. The people who are in the more modest income groups, people who are less likely to be home buyers, are more likely to have been laid off, more likely to have been impacted by the shutdowns. The people who have good jobs, white collar jobs, jobs where they're able to work remotely or to do things that allow us to avoid most severe shutdowns, they tend to be more likely to be home buyers. And so they're still in pretty good financial situation. And so as a result, they're still out there, they're still buying. But as the recession continues, those spillover effects and the fallout effects that has more broadly in other segments of the economy are going to continue to affect us. Lawrence is especially prone to that when it comes to the university, because the state's revenues are going to be severely diminished next year. There's just no way around that. With economic activity and so retail sales declining, with income tax receipts that are likely to decline, the state is going to be facing some severe financial constraints over the next couple of years unless the federal government comes up with some very, very significant stimulus to support the states. And that is going to translate into, here at Wichita State, for instance, we have been told to plan and budget for a 10% cut next year. And that's on top of 3% cuts that we already dealt with this last year, and essentially flat state funding for the past 10 years. And so it's a real severe situation, and issues of furloughs and issues of not replacing staff and potentially even layoffs are not out of the question. And so I think we have to be aware that those lingering economic impacts will have us. I think that will continue 2021 and even beyond. And that's going to be one impact that keeps us from continuing to grow. But the other thing that's keeping us from growing is these inventory issues. And the one thing that I found really fascinating here over the past year is, in the most popular price ranges, and I put that kind of as the $150,000 to $300,000 range. It's arbitrary. You could argue those cut points, but I said that let's call that the most popular price range, about a 1 month supply in the Lawrence metropolitan area. But if you looked at the upper end of the market, which I defined as over 500,000, things were very flush a year ago. There was still a lot of inventory out there. And what you'll notice is that over the past year, that segment of the market has now shifted so that it's really more of a balanced market. I'd note that if we were looking at Topeka, Topeka's in a place where it's actually above 400,000. They're down to about a 4 month supply. And so, the upper end of the market is no longer a buyer's market the way it may have been in past years. And so why is that? Well, again, I think it's because that upper end of the market, those are the buyers that are most likely to be in the most solid economic situation, least affected by the downturn. But I think it's also a function of the interest rates. I'm at a point where, hey, if I can lock in, I can buy what I want and I can go ahead and move up with these, there've been more homes available in those upper price ranges. So maybe I'll stretch into a home that I never imagined I'd afford before, but with the low interest rates, I can maybe make that happen. I think that's been helping to increase the sales and therefore taper down the inventories in those upper price ranges. But what all of this means is home price appreciation continues at a very, very rapid pace. We're forecasting a little bit of a slowdown this year, 4.1% increase in home prices on average in Lawrence this year, 3.9% next year, but still that's pretty solid appreciation. And after all those years in the early tens that were such low rates of appreciation and basically flat, it's nice to see this appreciation happening. And some of it was needed to really help bring some balance to the new home market. And while we're not seeing quite as much, dynamic, growth in Lawrence as we are in maybe Kansas City or in Wichita, still pretty healthy increase in new home construction this year, forecasting a jump up to 265 units this year, and then a slight decline in 2021 to 205 units. But where we're seeing really strong increases are in the Kansas City metropolitan area, which is forecasting 20+% growth, almost 25% growth next year. So really, really strong growth in the Kansas City metro area in terms of new home construction. Why is that happening? Again, in part, it's because we've had several years of really strong home price appreciation that has allowed construction costs to get more on par with existing homes. But it's also because with the low interest rates, people who maybe want what they want, they never really thought they could go new home because they couldn't get what they wanted and be able to afford it. Now they're able to get there with these super low interest rates. And so we think those are the things that are happening with that. So that is our forecast for Lawrence. Again, home sales activity up slightly this year, basically flat next year as supply constraints continue to take their toll, along with maybe some beginnings to feel the fallout of the recession. Single family building permits will be up this year, but drop a little bit, but still higher next year than they were last year. And home price appreciation continuing at a very solid, healthy clip. So as you know, we have forecasts for the state as a whole and for all of the major markets across the state. And of course, we're grateful to Security First and Meritrust for these publications. But I guess with that, let me jump back and say, okay, so what questions and where do you want me to go to address those questions?
So Stan, the COVID, this is Mike, the COVID's kind of like a black swan event. I mean, it was unpredictable, I think, from anybody. And so those kind of things only happen like a black swan, right? That's why they call them that. If you accept the premise that there will be a vaccine that will work in the next 6-12 months, at least in the United States, what do you see happening with our economic recovery and given that as a backdrop?
Yeah, so I I tend to be pretty sanguine about a lot of different events, and I think that my most, if I had to give the over under on when a vaccine is going to be approved, it would be January 1st. Okay, that's kind of but that then takes some time for it to be out and distributed. So I think that my hope is that by the time we hit next summer, we're really saying this is something that's behind us in terms of the pandemic itself and the weirdness that we've been living in through all of this time. And so let's take that as being, prescient and correct, which of course, none of us knows the right answer to that. It's all pure guess. I think that the economic fallout is going to take several years for us to really fully recover from that. And I do that just because ever since the recession of 1990, we found that recoveries tend to be very slow, very drawn out. And one of the things I think that it's easy to take for granted in all of the shutdown activity is how interconnected the economy is. On one hand, you might say, oh, as soon as the shutdowns are over, the hospitality industry, restaurants and hotels and so forth can just open right back up. Well, in theory, yes, but how many restaurants have completely gone out of business in the meantime? And that's not a trivial process for a new entrepreneur to come out and say, I have the idea, I want to go do it, and then to build up and build to the same level of activity. There are going to be a lot of bankruptcies of a lot of different companies that are going to not necessarily just be a financial restructuring, but severe declines in their employment. And then you have to understand that Kansas, as an overall state, we don't think about it, but we're much more like a Rust Belt state of Ohio or Indiana than we are like a Farm Belt state of Nebraska or Iowa. We have a large manufacturing base, and not just in Wichita. Throughout the state, there are lots of manufacturing facilities all around, and especially in durable goods manufacturing. There are some real severe supply chain issues and other structural issues that are going to take a long time to recover from. So I really think that we're going to be feeling the effects of the job losses for the next 2 or 3 years. However, it's going to start to feel better maybe a year after we begin, because it always feels better when you're going up than when you're going down, right? But again, think of the last several recessions and just how long it took to fully feel like we'd recovered.
Thank you.
Sorry, I never like to be bringing bad news, but I think this is one we need to be prepared for. Other questions?
With Zillow's new announcement, what kind of disruptor do you feel like that's going to be in 2021?
Forgive me, I've been so focused on my forecast, I haven't seen that announcement. So can you remind me, and I'll give you my thoughts.
They're going to broker cash deals, essentially, is what they're going to do.
Yeah. Most of you know I'm not a fan of national players in local real estate markets. I've never been a fan of the mortgage brokers that come in, the Rocket Mortgage and those things. I think that they, can they bring some slight price declines, some slight savings for some borrowers? Yes. Up until the day that something goes wrong with that transaction, and having a local professional that you can work with is, I think, going to be valuable. Let me give an analogy to this in terms of the big box stores versus the local hardware stores. There was a time when it looked like, the local Ace and True Value hardwares were going to just go out of the market and disappear. And granted, they've got a franchise so that they have some national purchasing power that's possible with that. But you go around the state and you see, those smaller local hardware stores are still being successful, but they've really had to focus on service. They've really had to focus on having that, that old guy there who knows what this thingamajig it is and how it fits into that whatchamacallit and work things. And of course, you go to the big box stores, for home improvement, and you're not going to get that. And I'm to the point, not from a philosophical, I want to support local anything. I'm just to the point where I go to my local little hardware store and only go to the big box stores only if there's something that I need that I can't get. And I firmly believe that's true in all sorts of areas. I mean, you're a service industry, and the service that you can provide with your local knowledge, local connections, and the ability to actually navigate that transition. I've always argued that a good realtor earns their commission not between listing and contract, but between contract and closing. It's when you get to that place where all the things that could cause that deal to fall apart, that's where a realtor brings value, and that's where a local presence can't be replicated. So, other questions? Oh, come now. You guys are usually so talkative, I can hardly get a word in edgewise. Don't be like my students.
It seems like with the Zoom meetings that our talkiveness, it goes away. So.
Well, it's not cocky. You know, one of the things that's difficult about Zoom meetings is that those little side conversations where you can kind of whisper to somebody and say, did I hear him say that right or not? You don't have that as easily to do. So, well, you know, I don't want to take all of your time. This has been a useful thing for me. Again, I always appreciate your insights. I feel sometimes like I get paid to come and listen to hear you guys talk and then come back and repeat what I've said and think you guys think I'm really smart. But I do value the relationship that we have and the time that we get to spend together. And I'm really looking forward to being able to come back and do it in person. Hopefully this spring with the Economic Outlook Conference, we'll be able to do that. So. Any final thoughts, Rob, that you wanted to give before we call it finished for today?
Just to thank you. You know, you're certainly a favorite of ours. We enjoy this, and maybe next year it'll resume, right, and we'll get back to business as usual. But just thank you again. This has been many years in our partnership, so we're grateful for your input and for taking the time today to share your insight with our group. So Ryan, any thoughts? Ryan may be tending to a small little baby. So anyway, thank you all. If you do have follow-up questions, please shoot them my way or directly to Stan. Many of you know him personally, and we'll try and get some additional answers for you in terms of a follow-up. But please know that we have, thank you to Stan and Meritrust and Security First. We have 800 copies of our housing market forecast right here, just inside the door. Just give us a call. We'll be happy to greet you with a handful or a armful or a whatever full. So give us a buzz and love to provide those. And thank you, Stan and sponsors for making that available to us.
Very good. And I will just note that I did record today's session. And so the video of this, I hope to have up on the Center for Real Estate's website and our YouTube channel later today. And hey, when you go to the YouTube channel, I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe to our channel. I'm 15 subscribers away from being able to have a custom URL. And so if we just get that last little hook, then I can get there with the WSU Center for Real Estate URL. So if you can help us do that, we'd be very grateful. All right. Well, thank you all very much. You have a wonderful day, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.